This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. After much work in part 1, we now begin part 2, transforming this beautiful Elizabethan portrait from rough to refined. You know, before we finish up the cleaning of this painting, and it is going to be so worth it, trust me on this one, I want to say thank you to Squarespace for making this video possible. And you know, it may seem weird that Squarespace, a digital website production company, is supporting me, an analog paintings conservator. But when you think about it, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense. I'm the caretaker of this artist's vision. It's my responsibility to make sure that the world sees it. And Squarespace is the caretaker of your vision, be it your artwork or your business. And that support comes in many different ways, like taking the burden of designing the website off your shoulders with their thousands of beautiful and mobile-friendly templates that work anywhere from phones, tablets, and to desktops, ensuring that you can reach everyone wherever they are. Or supporting your business through a comprehensive, robust e-commerce solution that allows you to sell products and services online with the click of a button. Or even giving you a little help with marketing and growing your brand or presence on the web with search engine optimization, email lists, and a whole suite of tools to make sure that people know where to find you. Squarespace even has a really cool logo creator to give you a hand at the very beginning of your project or business. But the most acute support is standing behind you if and when you run into trouble, with online tutorials, webinars, an active forum full of thousands of users just like you, and good old-fashioned humans on the other end of a tech line. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, if only Squarespace could come to the studio and lend me a hand with some of the scraping, now that would be real support. In part 1, we began removing this old, discolored, and heavily oxidized natural resin varnish from the surface of the painting. And in the process, we revealed the artist's mastery at capturing this beautifully embroidered clothing, the pearls which capture the light, and those stunning jewels. And now, as we continue on through the lacework, we can see just how talented he or she really was, capturing the intricacies of this ruff. And as we finally progress onto the face, well, we can imagine that it too will be quite stunning. While the painting may now finally appear clean with all of that old, discolored natural resin varnish finally removed, it's not. There are residues from the previous conservation still on the surface of the painting, and I need to remove those now. Rather than using a free solvent, which I used previously to remove the majority of the varnish, I'm using a resin soap, which has been specially formulated in the studio. It works a little bit slower and requires agitation, here with an old bristle brush that's on the last leg of its life, but still wants to participate. And this makes it less than ideal for removing the top layer of varnish, but a perfect approach for removing these residues. Once I've agitated the surface, I can use a cotton ball to lift off all of that residue. And you can see, even though it's a subtle change, it matters. It's just not okay to leave that residue on the surface. So, much like I did with cleaning the varnish, I'll work in small sections, and I'll put the resin soap on, I'll agitate it, and then remove it with a cotton ball. And once I'm done removing all of these residues, I'll come back with a neutralizing solution to make sure that the resin soap has stopped working and that it doesn't interfere with any of the materials or procedures I intend to do going forward. Now, removing all of those residues has revealed all these beautiful colors, but it's also revealed a lot of little fly specks. And fly specks are, well, it's fly poop. Flies land on the surface of things, and that's when they poop. And it gets stuck on the painting. And over a long enough time, it effectively becomes part of the surface of the painting. And it can't be removed with any solvents or gels. So it has to be removed mechanically. So I'm taking a scalpel and just very, very lightly, just with the weight of the blade itself, abrading the surface to try to break up some of these spots. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that I really dislike doing. Going over a painting 2, 3, 4, 5 times, scraping up these tiny little specks. But, much like the residues of the old varnish, it's just not acceptable to leave it on the surface. Now, certainly we could entertain retouching all of these spots away, but I'm not sure that's any faster or easier, and if I can limit the amount of new material that I add to a painting, I think that's a good approach, and it's well within the ethical framework of conservation as it's practiced in modernity. In addition, I'm going to remove some of the old fill-in and retouching that just wasn't standing proud enough previously, but now that the painting has been lined with an interleaf, I can really see it, and so I'm going to get rid of it. But where there are losses, I need to fill those in with a medium. Otherwise, not only will the retouching have nothing to stick to, but we'll see all of these little divots. And that will just draw our eye to the damage. And effectively, all of the work that I've done will be for nothing, because all we will see is the damage. Luckily for me, this painting has almost no impasto. It's completely smooth, has none of that beautiful, thick, textural buildup of paint that artists love to apply to canvases. So here, all I need to do is apply the fill-in and work it really, really smooth, and then remove as much of it as I can with my palette knife. Once it's dried, a few hours later, I can come back and start removing all of the excess. When I fill in losses, I do so with what appears to be a heavy hand, applying the fill-in medium all over the painting. It's because it's much easier to over-apply and then remove than it is to try to only apply to the little losses. Trust me, I have tried. So with a little cotton ball swab, I can remove all of this excess. And then I can go over it with my hands and rub it smooth. This allows me to lift off any little bits, but also feel how the surface is. And this is really critical because if I don't remove all of this excess, I'll have to retouch over it, and that would be excessive. I have tried many different ways to remove the fill-in medium faster, more efficiently, to save on time, to save on cost, but unfortunately there is no fast way to do it. Each one of these losses is unique and different and needs to be approached differently than the others, and so this is just simply how it works. With all of the fill-in removed and all of the dirty work now complete, I can finally remove this blue painter's tape that I applied to the raw canvas to keep it protected and keep everything clean and tidy. And there has been a little bit of seeping through, but certainly less than there would have been if I didn't apply this tape, and I think that this is a really satisfactory result, and I'm happy with it. likelihood of anybody seeing this is really nil. The client probably never will, and it really doesn't have any functional effect on the quality of the painting conservation, but it speaks to the care that I like to give to all of these paintings. And if I can do it, it seems like a lost opportunity to skip it. Before the painting can actually go back to the client, it needs to be married to the new stretcher support. Remember, this was on an old strainer that wasn't original, and it wasn't providing adequate support. We've had a new support custom fabricated to fit this painting, and now, using some steel tacks, we can begin affixing it to the support. Because this painting has an interleaf, a rigid piece of PET film between the lining canvas and the original canvas, the original painting is effectively immobilized. It's not going to react to humidity changes. It won't expand and contract. It won't get slack on the canvas or extra tight depending on the humidity. And this is great. This is what we wanted for this canvas. And it makes the stretching much easier because I don't really have to worry about the tension. I can simply affix it with tacks, and then the little bit of keying that I'll do later on will remove any slack. Before I can key it out, I need to deal with the back and clean up all of this excess canvas. So I'm cutting all of the corners and trimming down all of this canvas. Again, it's easier to make everything bigger or larger and then trim it down after the fact than it is to try to make it perfect from the get-go. Another step that I like to take that is almost completely useless and pointless is to fold over and tack these tacking edges. I could cut them off, I could glue them, I could just leave them loose, but I think it looks really nice. And if anybody ever does see it, well, I hope that they can identify that a lot of care went into this process. Folding over these corners and tucking them in not only looks good, but it also makes sure that these corners are extra tight because the canvases are folded over and they're not going to come loose when I do key it out. I'm just tapping these keys very lightly in, and I'm not really worried about adding tension to the canvas here, just filling up those joints so that they don't become loose. And the final step in all of the structural work before I can start thinking about the actual painting and the image is to bind these keys in place. I've drilled some holes in them and I'm feeding through some fishing line, and I'm going to just wind it around a tack, hammer it in place. And this will make sure that these keys never come loose and get lost. And just like that, I'm ready to now start focusing on the front of the painting, which I've been looking forward to since I first saw this work. And that all begins with applying an isolation layer. And this is going to do a couple of things here. One, it's going to make sure that the fill-in medium doesn't absorb all of the retouching paint and create a flat or matte area. Two, it's going to make the painting look spectacular. I mean, just look at it. Three, it's going to be a layer of protection against fingerprints, oils, dust, dirt, grime, and ultraviolet light, which could affect the painting. And we're going to do the retouching on top of this, but before we can, I'm going to brush out the varnish, giving it a sheen that I think is going to look really good. Once I'm done with this, I can let it dry, and then I can transfer it over to the easel and start putting this painting back together. Finally. The easel, or retouching process, is where the most exciting and daunting part of the conservation takes place. It's exciting because now, with my own hand and my skill, I get to make the painting appear as if there's no damage. It's daunting because, with my own hand and skill, I have to make the painting appear as if there's no damage. I'm using a special retouching paint. Instead of having oil as the binder, it has a synthetic resin, which makes it more stable, makes it resistant against ultraviolet fading, and it also means that it's never going to harden and oxidize like oil paint, making it reversible. And that's pretty key, because even though I think I'm going to do a really good job retouching here, if in the future somebody doesn't like my retouching, or it needs to come off for another treatment, this paint can, with almost no effort. It's so easy it can be wiped off in a matter of seconds. And that means that the next conservator is going to have a little bit easier of a time than I did. And I like to pay it forward. I started off with this little tear on the lower right edge because I think it's going to give me an easy victory. It's always nice to get a win before you tackle the more difficult parts. And this is relatively straightforward. It's mostly black and white, there's some brown. It's not terribly complicated or complex. And so I think it's a good place to start. This is also really fun, removing these little areas that are so consequential and so visually disrupting and putting this painting back together. Now on the edge here, most of this is going to be covered by the frame. The rabbit will come over the edge of the painting about 1/4 of an inch, but I'm still going to take the time to retouch as much of it as I can so that A, it looks good when it goes back to the client, and if they choose to frame it in a way that doesn't cover that much, well, it doesn't have to come back to me for additional work. Now, on an area like this where there's missing content and I don't know exactly what's there, I have to make some guesses. Luckily, there is a lot of other content, a lot of other embroidery on the clothing that I can use to be a reference point, but I still have to invent. I try not to take artistic liberties and try to follow what I think would have been there, looking at the other parts of the painting and copying them. But if for some reason I'm off and we find historical documentation that instead of what I put, something else was there, well, it can be removed. That's one of the reasons we do retouching this way, with reversible materials. Now, sometimes retouching losses is literally a matter of copying what is right next to you. And for this little button, all I have to do is look down and to the left to see another one, and it provides a very clear guide for what I need to replace. This isn't terribly interesting or all that complicated, or really even all that much fun because, well, I'm literally just copying. But it's easy, and sometimes that's exactly what you need, particularly when you have more difficult retouching coming up. Having a mix of easy and difficult, fun and boring makes the project, well, it makes the project more interesting as a whole. If all the retouching is really difficult or really easy, it can be kind of, well, mundane. For this major loss, the retouching begins by laying down some color. I'm not really worried about any detail or really any volumetric shaping right now. I just need to get some color on the canvas to get rid of the white. The presence of the white fill-in is somewhat distracting. It is hard to see past. So by filling it in with just some grays, I can start to see what isn't there. And then I can start to go back in and create some definition of both shape and volume. And there's no trick here. It's just a matter of applying some color and seeing how it looks and how it carries through with the rest of the painting, and changing it, and then going back and changing it again. And I will work in the shadows, and then I'll work on the highlights, and then I'll work on the shadows again. It's not like painting. Retouching is not like painting. You don't start off with big broad brush strokes and darks and then work up to the top layers. Sometimes you have to go the other way, and sometimes you have to go back and forth. But that's because retouching is different. We're not trying to create, we're just trying to mimic or blend in. And effectively, any which way we can do that, as long as we get to the finish line, that's okay. And so you can see I've started to work on the other areas to the right of the major damage, just kind of eliminating any of those distractions so that I can start to see what should be there. For me, this is actually not terribly difficult because I have stuff to copy. Throughout the rest of the Ruff, there is this pattern repeated. In fact, it's repeated right above and to the left. So I have something right in front of me that I can copy. This makes retouching really, really easy, and it makes me really happy that this is the loss and it's not an eyeball or part of her cheek or something where it's just much more consequential and takes much, much more intellectual and emotional investment. This is fairly routine, and for most conservators, this isn't going to take too long. But as I work to slowly copy the pattern, you can see that the damage really does start to disappear. And once it's all done, yes, if we looked at it under a microscope, we could certainly see where my retouching ends and the original begins. But that's not the point. We're looking to trick the eye, to make the eye pass over this area without pausing. to see it as a whole and not to see it as different. And if we do that, then the retouching has been successful. And that is the ultimate goal. Even on her face, where there are just lots of tiny little black dots from abrasions and previous cleanings, getting rid of them makes a difference. The sum of all of these little distractions pulls our attention away from her gaze and from the artist's skill to the surface of the painting, and we start to see the damage. We start to see the trees, not the forest. And so making a couple of passes, just removing these little blemishes, well, her skin looks clearer. And then we don't see it. We start to see her expression. And then we start to wonder about the artist who captured it so brilliantly. And that is the function of retouching, to get rid of all of the distractions, to allow us to see the image and the skill required to execute it without being distracted. And finally, for the most consequential part of the retouching, the hole and slash right under her eye, right where we are going to focus all of our attention. Well, I've left that for last because I want to feel as confident as possible. I don't want to make any mistakes, and I don't want to have to spend too much time going over and over this. But you can see, as I apply the color, it starts to change. Sometimes the whites become translucent, and the darks, well, they get darker as they dry. And so understanding how this paint works when it's wet and as it dries is really critical. And this is where the years of working with this particular paint come into practice. Because I can't remove anything that I put on the canvas. Remember, we put this isolation layer on, and so if I try to remove any of this retouching, the isolation layer will come up too, and then I'll have to remove all of that, which will take up all of the retouching. So high stakes this is, but that's okay. I'm ready for it, and I've prepared for it by doing all of the other stuff first so that I feel confident and ready to tackle this. With the retouching complete, I can now apply a final varnish to the painting. And this is the same varnish that I used for the isolation layer, so I have to spray it on, because if I brushed it, it would reactivate the isolation layer and take up the retouching. After making one pass, I'll raise the gun and dust the varnish on the surface, giving it an almost shimmery, glittery effect, one that is really truly beautiful in person. And with that, my work here is complete, and we can now see what she truly looks like. With all of that old grime and natural resin varnish removed, we can see the beautiful colors, free from that tint of yellow. We can see her beautiful expression and the delicacy with which the artist executed this painting, the precision of this embroidery, the highlights on all of the gold and gold thread, the light glimmering off the jewels and the pearls. This is a testament not only to the sitter's wealth or projected wealth, but to the artist's skill. And it's unfortunate that this painting isn't signed, because whoever painted it was truly a master, as evidenced by the beautiful lacework on this ruff. It may seem quite easy or simple to paint this lacework, but in reality it's incredibly difficult and requires incredible skill. And now that the old hole is gone and all of the retouching has been executed, we can see the painting without damage, without distraction. And we can really start to wonder who she was, why she wanted this painting painted, and who the artist was. When the painting arrived, it was no doubt beautiful, but it was hiding under a thick layer of varnish. But as we got it cleaned, well, it's truly a different painting. It's bright and alive, and we can see just how beautiful it really is. Under ultraviolet light, we can see all of the retouching that I added to the painting and just how minimal and restrained it really is. But a painting like this isn't complete without a frame. And so here are a couple of period frames that might be appropriate for this painting. And take note of how they change how this painting feels, from grand to humble, modest to extravagant, from English to Dutch. The whole tenor of the painting changes with the simple addition of a frame. even one that may be laying around somebody's studio waiting for a painting. Frame or not, she has now been transformed from rough to refined.